Howza, internets? Welcome to Worldview Everlasting, your favorite YouTube addiction. And on this week's show, question about civil authority, civil realm, political existence, and turning the other, cheek. But first, it's time for your issues, etc. question of the week. Pastor Fisk, I go to a Christian high school that sings contemporary music during chapel. I am used to singing hymns. So this is a bit different. Yeah. I was wondering how to know if what I'm singing in chapel is all biblically correct. Hate to say it, but here's a hint. If it's from revivalism, your betting odds are that it's not. Sorry all you revivalists out there, but betting odds, it's not. You can maybe find the needle in the haystack, but... You spin me right round, Jesus, right round, like a record, Jesus, right round, round, round. Oof. Some of the songs we sing don't always seem correct. Good for you. You can smell it eventually. And I would like to be aware when they aren't. Do you know of any songs that aren't biblically correct? Thanks. And again, all of them? Seriously, it's not quite all of them, but it's darn near close, and many of them that aren't necessarily incorrect. The problem is there's not necessarily anything correct about them either. They're just kind of like, blah.
Now, the lyrics don't need to be deep, they just need to be easy enough so that people can remember them by the second time they get to the chorus.
God, blah, praise, blah, God, good.
One thing in your song should always be on fire.
Right? Which is sort of what Islam says too, if you ever think about it. But seriously, you can find some decent lyrics here and there, sure. It's more the issue with the genre of what we call contemporary or praise music being connected to the history of the movement of revivalism, a manipulative movement geared to kind of twist your emotions for the sake of getting you to make a decision for Jesus. Now, we've talked about this in the past a bit on Worldview Everlasting, that we usually don't go after this particular issue. But Pastor Brian Wolfmueller did a great episode on issues, etc. a couple years back on the connection between praise music and mysticism. And he's got this pretty cool resource called the Praise Song Cruncher that you can use to ask questions about any song, whether it's a praise song or even a hymn. And it's not a bad idea to do that too. So you can listen to the interview, check out the Praise Song Cruncher, and find a link to Table Talk Radio. Not that I'd know why you'd ever want to listen. Down below.
Email.
A friend and I were talking about the violence in the world when she said Christians shouldn't fight back against radicals from another religion who are making war on them in Africa, because Christ said to turn the other cheek. I struggle with that, and I thought, I can turn the other cheek personally, but I am not sure I can turn the other cheek and let others who are innocent suffer at the hands of evil. What does the Bible say on this? You pretty much got it right there, that when Jesus says turn the other cheek, he is actually given a commandment against taking personal vengeance on somebody that has wronged you, rather than the goodness of having someone do wrong and not seeking to have your rage propitiated by your own actions toward them. As Peter says in chapter 3 verse 17, it is better to suffer for doing good, if that should be God's will, than for doing evil. And as Paul says to the Corinthians who are bringing lawsuits against each other within the congregation, why not rather suffer wrong? Why not rather be defrauded? But you yourselves wrong and defraud even your own brothers. Do not be deceived. So there is this beautiful reality that Christianity teaches patience and long suffering with regards to your personal life in the world. However, to use this as a blanket statement, which makes all the other passages about everything else in the Bible go away, is not exactly scripture interpreting scripture, sola scriptura, or anything like that. Because you also have a number of passages in the Bible which uplift and uphold what we would call the civil order, or the structures that God has designed into our world, which then come down to us through things like father and mother, as well as government. So let's just put a little spin on this. I'm at home with my 2-year-old who decides to slap the face of his older sister.
He is coming for you.
He then immediately turns and runs at me and sinks his teeth deep into my calf.
His teeth were like razors,
causing them to bleed. I am his father. Now, granted, he hasn't quite done this yet. The slapping thing maybe, but the biting not. But I'm trying to make the extreme example, right? I am his father. Should I turn the other cheek?
And let him come.
Well, son, I will let you behave like a wild animal and destroy and harm everyone around you.
I was only a child. You were an animal. Look at my hand.
Since Jesus has told me to be a pacifist and never do anything of physical nature to anyone ever? Or do I recognize that I have been given a vocation and authority within society, and that this is actually from God, being that this is the fruit of my loins, as my duty to raise this human not to be only a sinner, but to actually have some virtue in him. And the way that this must happen is through punishment.
Charlie bit my finger!
I mean, it doesn't have to be physical punishment. I mean, I'm not even going there today. I'm saying at the very least, he reaches back to slap his sister. I gotta catch that hand, pull it down, and say, you will not slap your sister.
Oh, Charlie, that really hurt.
Right, that's my duty, that's my authority, that's my justice, which I must impart to the household which I rule, by God's design, yeah? And I'm not saying my wife doesn't rule too, although, Ephesians 5, yeah, and we're in it together, but not exactly and stuff. But that's a different topic.
You have my undivided attention.
Point being, God has established authorities in the world for the sake of administering structured justice, and this is a good thing. Romans chapter 13 is a classic example that applies this not only to the family, but to society. I believe we just looked at it a couple of months ago, but let's look at it again really quick. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. For he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. He is a servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. Now, without going into everything we could say about that, so are you saying then that since Jesus said, turn the other cheek, if you're a Christian, you cannot be God's servant in civil government because you would have to, as God's servant, do the right thing and bear the sword, and so as a Christian, you're not allowed to hold civil government or office. And if you think that sounds crazy, I mean, slow down there, yo-yo, because this is something that's been said a number of times in history by those who purport to be the new revelation of the church, bringing it back, restoring it to the world. This is part of why you have the Amish out hiding in the fields, trying not to use electricity, except for when they do. This is what the Anabaptist movement during the Reformation was all about, and so it even shows up in the Lutheran confessions, the rejection of this idea that Jesus' kingdom is so very much not of this earth that you're not allowed to have any participation in things of this earth. And like most forms of pietism, it only goes insofar as that person's personal piety and never all the way to its absurd but logical conclusions. And so they'll say things like you can't hold office or fight in a war as a Christian, but they're never actually going to abstain from everything in this life, like, not shopping at the store and using the money that's used to support the war as a Christian, right? I mean, so anyway, to try to put this in its context, let's look at what our confessions say about this. One of my favorite things in the world, a dramatic reading of the Book of Concord, Augsburg Confession and Apology, Article 16. And if I had a British accent, it would just be so much cooler. I'd like to think I do, but it probably would sound more like Indian if I did it. Concerning public order and secular government, it is taught that all political authority, orderly government, laws, and good order in the world are created and instituted by God, and that Christians may, without sin, exercise political authority, may be princes and judges, pass sentences, and administer justice according to imperial and other existing laws, punish evildoers with the sword, wage just wars, serve as soldiers, buy and sell, take oaths required, possess property, be married, etc. In short, we confess that legitimate civil ordinances are good creations of God and therefore divine ordinances in which a Christian can safely take part. This entire topic on the distinction between Christ's kingdom and the civil realm comes down to this, that Christ's kingdom is spiritual. It is the heart's knowledge of God, fear of God, faith in God, and the beginning of eternal righteousness. At the same time, it permits us to make use of outward political ordinances of whatever nation we live in the same way that it permits us to make use of medicine, or architecture, or food, or drink, etc.
Roundabout.
Neither does the gospel introduce new laws for the civil realm. Instead, it commands us to obey the present laws, whether they have been formulated by pagans or others, the speed limit, and urges us to practice love, which turns the other cheek, through obedience to these laws of the land. For the gospel does not destroy the state or the household, but rather approves them, and I would say redeems them. The gospel does prohibit private redress, and thus private revenge is prohibited. Public redress, which is made through the office of, say, a judge, is not forbidden, but is commanded and is in fact a work of God, according to Paul in Romans 13. Now, these different kinds of public redress include judicial decisions, punishments, wars, and military service. How poorly many writers have understood these matters is evident from their erroneous view that the gospel is something external, a new and monastic form of government, which is what your friend is saying. Christian perfection is not found in contempt for civil ordinances, but in the profound fear of God and in a strong faith. And guess who they're really arguing against here in the confessions at this point? The monks. Yeah? The monks. I mean, isn't that what we're trying to get away from, Protestants? Really? You're gonna tell me that incense is Catholic, but telling a Christian he has to be a pacifist is Protestant? Sorry, that's the Catholic thing. The importance of these matters has been completely obscured by the silly monastic opinions, which far prefer the ridiculous and completely false hypocrisy of piety poverty and humility to the state and household, even though the latter have God's command, while the Platonic commune does not. Now, there certainly is something to be said for what's going on in certain states and regions of the world where you have like this whole Christians versus Muslims thing, fighting a war against each other, and you actually have like the Christians like killing all the Muslims and even exterminating them. In most instances, I would even say maybe in all, this is not about civil ordinances and government waging a just war to protect the innocent. This is about tribalism and cultural supremacy, at which point calling them either Christians or Muslims is maybe a little bit deceptive. Now granted, Islam in its teachings actually says do this, Christianity however does not. And so a just ruler putting down an uprising which had sought to overthrow the government and impose not only a religion but a slavery upon the people, when defending itself and defeating the enemy, does not consider it justice to wipe them off the face of the planet, generally speaking. But all those issues, I mean, they're specific, so you can't, impose one idea upon what's going on in Africa, say, from what went on in Kosovo. And at the same time, it's really very middle-class, white wine-sipping pietist of you to sit in America and condemn some guy who's protecting his family from getting raped and killed by telling him he should turn the other cheek. I mean, you're watching this video and you disagree with me, are you turning the other cheek right now? You're just gonna softly walk away, hey, patience and quietness, and it doesn't matter if I'm wrong or not, your job is to let bygones be bygones and just be quiet. Right? I mean, that's not what Jesus is talking about. He is talking about private revenge. And in which case, if you're a soldier and somebody harms you and you take the private revenge of murdering them in cold blood, that would be wrong. Yeah? Meanwhile,
It's the hole of doom.
civil ordinances and authority, even making war for the sake of protecting the civil government, is, in this fallen world, something which God has given government to do. Don't take my word for it. Romans chapter 13, go read it yourself. Spend some time, read it 3-4 times. The sword is not in vain. It's from God. So, thanks for tuning in. Never forget, you can always help this show by liking, subscribing, and sharing what we do, not to mention joining the Lutheran Ninja Clan. $5 a month goes a long way in making what we do here possible for you. Meanwhile, never forget to, as you go about your business, rock on.
Charlie bit me!